A very warm welcome to yet another session of pendulum healing. You might have heard of various pendulums which are used by pendulum healers all throughout the world. You might have heard about the Karnak. You might have also heard about the Isis pendulum. You might have also heard about the Osiris pendulum and a combination of them, for example, the Marisis one, or some people also use the Mermet chamber pendulum to put something into it and do the healing. But what we are going to talk about today is something which is the most advanced pendulum in the world available today, and that is called the Universal Pendulum. And to talk about it, I have a very special guest. He has been the author of many books on pendulum healing. He has devoted more than a decade in this particular field, and he does pendulum healing on an everyday basis. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to bring on to you Dr. Erich Hunter. Welcome, Erich.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Have you talk on this important pendulum today.
My pleasure.
Let's take the cat out of the box and first of all share with our viewers this important and complex pendulum. If you can just show it, your version as well on the screen. Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, this is called the Universal Pendulum, where you have a freedom of giving a lot of frequencies, which we'll be talking about in our talk today. And let us start, Erich, by introducing this particular pendulum to our viewers and also explaining a little bit on why it is called, the most advanced pendulum.
Sure. So the Universal Pendulum, if you're interested in pendulums, you've probably seen it at one point or another. Normally, they are made of wood and look black. But in recent years, especially with my work, there have been other varieties that have been created, like I created ones made out of metal, plastic, etc. This pendulum is designed specifically to send colors for healing. Now, originally, it was intended for other uses as well. So the history of this is that there were some authors who were experimenters in France, and they were interested in energy. And they had this idea that you could get, if you had a specific shape, you could channel energy from the atmosphere and then use that energy for constructive purposes. So they didn't like the idea of like having a nuclear power plant or having an electric power plant, and they wanted to get free energy from the cosmos. So that was the kind of their motivation for creating all these various instruments. And one of them that they created was this Universal Pendulum. And it's called universal because it has the entire electromagnetic spectrum, or all of what we think of as energy, represented in the form of little letters, abbreviations on the surface. So it's universal in that it accesses all energy. And it's considered to be very complicated because, number one, in the past, it has not been explained properly in my point of view. Most people who sell them, who teach about them, don't really understand what is going on in my view. The other reason why it's complicated is because it deals with electromagnetic energy, and the average person interested in energy healing or pendulums, they're not like trained in the sciences. So it sounds very difficult to understand or abstract when you're talking about gamma radiation or, radio waves or infrared. Those things sound very foreign to most people who are interested in pendulums. So for those two reasons, confusion with the pendulum, especially with the lettering that's on most of them, and then also confusion about what electromagnetic energy is and how it works. Even at a very simple level, because you don't need to do extensive maths or anything like that to understand how this works, but you do need to have some kind of basic understanding of there's a light spectrum that has a range of energies from low frequency to high frequency. It goes from invisible to visible to invisible again. Yeah, so does that answer the question?
Yeah, why not? Let me just put a little more perspective into it.
Please, yeah.
So, as human beings, we have thresholds of our senses. And for the eyes, we are able to see only a part of whatever can be seen. And that part is very small. What the universal pendulum does is that it gives us uh, it gives us the freedom to send that kind of color or that kind of frequency or that kind of energy which we want to out of the whole spectrum, whether it is visible by our eyes or whether it is not visible by our eyes. Moreover, it also gives us an option to send either the magnetic energy or the electric energy or the electromagnetic energy, to which Eric has its own views, and I will just come to that.
Yeah, I was
However,
about to say, but it's
however,
okay, keep going.
yeah. However, the point is, so if somebody wants to send a particular energy, red energy, for example, or something between the red and the yellow, or the yellow and the orange, everything is possible. You just have to move on, you just have to slide, and you are ready to go in order to transmit one particular energy from your pendulum. But this particular option, since it is not available in the other regular pendulums, therefore it is called the most advanced one. Now, when I was learning a little about the universal pendulum from Eric, it was very insightful and very, I thought later that it made a lot of common sense as well. That when he said that if you want to send some energy, ultimately, even if you are sending an electric energy or a magnetic one, ultimately, according to the rules of physics or nature, it will transmit only electromagnetic energy, because wherever, I think I will let you take over on it and clarify this particular issue.
Yeah, sure. So let me just step back a little bit. So in terms of like practical use, like let's say you want to help somebody to heal.
Yeah.
And they have a weakened root chakra, like their lower chakra is weakened. You can use this pendulum to transmit the frequency of red light from the environment to that person, and it can energize that chakra and it can promote healing in the person. Likewise, if a person is having difficulty sleeping, like they have insomnia or something like that, you can send blue or violet energy and that will calm the person down. And you send it just by turning the bow. So you just turn it to the energy you want to send, and then you just hold it over the person, let it spin, and it will have an effect. And I've done experiments where I don't tell the person what I'm doing. And when I use this, I can make them more tired. I can energize them. So the theory corresponds with what I see happening with a person's responses. And there's no chance for placebo effect because they can't see what I'm doing and I'm not telling them what I'm doing. So like a person was having difficulty sleeping, I set it to the blue, and because that's the higher chakras where the mind is too active. So I sent the blue energy to calm the mind. And then the person got very tired. And then it was very early on in my use of this pendulum. And then I set it to the red because I was like, well, maybe I want to like also help them to heal. I set it to the red and the person's like, what are you doing? I'm waking up now. So this thing sends energies and it's very, very practical to use on a daily basis. Now, for those of you who already kind of know about this pendulum and have more advanced knowledge, there is this idea that you can use this pendulum to transmit either the electric or the magnetic part of the energy spectrum. Because so if you're a beginner, just hold on to your hats here. But if you're more advanced, this is for you. So basically, when light or any other form of electromagnetic energy travels through the environment, it goes in the form of a wave. And one wavelength is electric, but then there's another wavelength that's automatically created. So one is going up and down, one is going side to side. That's the magnetic. So electric, magnetic, they're always together. One creates the other. And this was a major discovery in physics that help people to understand modern physics. Now, if you're interested in this type of pendulum, once you start studying it, you find very quickly that there is this claim, and it goes back to the guys who founded this pendulum, but then it's been carried on through the decades, that this pendulum can just transmit one or the other. Like if you hold it in a certain place on the string, it will only transmit the electric frequency, or if you hold it in a certain place on the string, it will only transmit the magnetic frequency, and or you could detect the electric or the magnetic frequency. And this is one area where I have great difficulty accepting this idea, because like I said, it's been shown, like without a doubt in modern day physics, that electric wavelength always creates the magnetic and vice versa. If energy is moving, it's always in the form of electromagnetism. It's a violation of the law of physics. Now, I mean, you could argue the physics is wrong, but I just have difficulty. And, I really wouldn't care so much that people have this idea. Like there's an entire field that I'm not going to name, and their entire thing is based on this. And, I don't really have a problem if people want to make a claim like that. Let everyone just have what they want to do. But here's where it really bothers me, because there's some poor person who's just learning about pendulums for the first time. And then they're told, oh, well, there is a harmful electric wavelength coming out of the pendulum, and it can hurt you and it can kill you and make you sick.
That
So
we will just come
yeah,
to
I just saying briefly that this is why I care about this, because in my view, that idea doesn't make any sense. Like so if you're going to use the language of science and talk about electric and magnetic waves, well, if you're going to use the language of science, you've got to follow the rules of science. I mean, if you want to just make up your own thing, that's fine. You just need to maybe use a different language. So in my view, this thing is doing both at all times. But yeah, so that's kind of where that is going.
No, you explained it very well. Basically, what you were trying to focus on is that when we are transmitting a particular energy from our universal pendulum, it will always be an electromagnetic energy, no matter whether you are holding it from here, that is the electric or the magnetic or the electromagnetic, always. As a rule, why? Because if energy has to travel, the magnetic energy cannot travel alone, the electric energy cannot travel alone, and that follows the rule of physics or the rule of nature. And you are 100% right. But the problem is now with the people at large who are into pendulum healing, that they are fearful.
Exactly.
They're very fearful about one particular energy, which is called the negative green energy, which they have heard about. And this pendulum, Karnak, also sends negative green energy. And therefore, what they say is that if you have to store it in a box or keep it at a place, just make sure that the two parts are open like this, and then you keep it. And only once you have to use it, then you bring it, tie it up again, and then start using it. So what is this fear of negative green? What if we don't just loosen it out? What if we don't put this particular pendulum in the box? Can it emit that negative green energy? And if yes, then what can it possibly do? Please enlighten us.
Okay, so this is going to require several steps of explanation. So I'll start very simple, and I'll work my way progressively to more complex and nuanced understanding or explanation. So like you said, many people have heard about this concept of negative green and that it's harmful. So the first thing I noticed, well, let's say, and they would say, like, take your pendulum apart or put it into a box. Well, the first thing I want to say is that if you take a Karnak pendulum apart, the negative green, the supposed negative green producing part is the long part that's like a rod. Yeah. So if it was really being produced, taking it apart would have no effect on that, because the rod, that part there, is what is creating this so-called negative green effect. So taking it apart makes no difference. That would be the thing I would say. It's because that's the part that's creating this effect.
Right.
All right. So that's very simple, very fundamental. Now, the next part, which is a little more advanced, is that when you read about the so-called negative green, modern authors say it's harmful because there's this electric wavelength of negative green that exists in isolation, and it can travel through the environment and it can hurt you. Okay, so right away, I'm like, well, there's a little bit of a problem there because it's been clearly shown in modern day physics that you cannot have the electric wavelength traveling without the magnetic wavelength. So this idea appears to be false. Now, they could create a new system that's not based on scientific language and say that there's some kind of energy coming out of the or being emanated by pendulum, that's a different story. But if we're just gonna,
it can be put as that you can go in front of the sun, close your eyes, and they say that sun doesn't exist.
Right, right. So I mean, you can say all kinds of things, but like at the end of the day, it's been demonstrated over and over and over again for over 100 years in modern physics that if you have an electric wavelength, it's going to create the magnetic. There's just no way that it can exist in isolation from it. So I have a real problem with saying that this pendulum or your Carnac pendulum is harmful because it doesn't seem to be true, the basic claim. There's a lot of evidence against that, overwhelming evidence against that idea. Okay, so that's sort of the next level there of complexity. Now, let's dig a little further. So what I did was I read the modern literature on this topic, and it's very deceptive in my view because they use scientific language and then they create their own system of energy that has no relation to science. Like they call it vibrations or something like that. So it's very deceptive in a sense because you're starting to think scientifically, but then you're like, well, wait a minute, this makes absolutely no sense from a scientific perspective. So then they're like, well, you don't really need the science. We just use that language and here's our own idea of what energy is. It's all vibrations and all this stuff. So I'm like, okay, well, there's a little bit of a problem here because you haven't really created a bridge from point A to point B. You're just kind of using point A to justify what you're saying and make it sound legitimate. And then you just create your own system that has no connection at all. So I was like, okay, what does the original literature say? The guys who created this pendulum were the ones who came up with this idea of negative green. What do they say about it? So I went back to their original papers that are in French. I translated the papers. I read all of the papers and I analyzed them, scrutinized them. And what I discovered is that they believed that this negative green was literally nuclear energy. Stronger than a gamma ray. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with what nuclear energy is, think of a nuclear power plant or an atomic bomb. It is the most intense and powerful form of energy. When stars explode, they give off nuclear energy. The sun has nuclear reactions going on that give off light and heat.
Let me just intervene and tell our viewers that if we can divide energy from the lowest frequency one till the highest frequency, what do we get is from the lowest frequency one, that is the biggest wavelength, that is moving from the infrared, the radio waves, and slowly, gradually, we move on to the visible spectrum, that is from red, then orange, yellow, green, etc., coming to violet, and then beyond violet, the invisible spectrum again starts, the ultraviolet. Then is what we get, the gamma rays, and after that, at the end, the fastest and the shortest wavelength is something which we call as the negative green. So here, Erich is trying to explain now something more about negative green. Do we need to be really fearful just because this particular energy is used in nuclear reactions and in atomic reactions? Can really this pendulum emit that kind of stuff when it is lying with us? This is what exactly now Dr. Erich is trying to explain.
Right. So I did the research and I was reading, well, what did the original people say about it? So what they were claiming was that this pendulum or your Karnak pendulum could somehow transmit the strongest form of energy known in the universe, more powerful than was given off in a nuclear explosion, more powerful than was given off in a piece of plutonium. They were saying that it's stronger than a cosmic ray. So in the energy spectrum, gamma rays are very, very strong. Cosmic rays are the strongest energy known. And they said, well, this negative green is a theoretical form of energy that scientists don't know about, but it's even stronger than a cosmic ray. Now, here's the thing. We know that gamma rays can penetrate through material. So, for example, when you go to the dentist, even like an X-ray can penetrate. So when you go to the dentist and you get an X-ray, which is weaker than a gamma ray and much weaker than what negative green is supposed to be, you have to wear a lead shield to protect you from the X-rays going through your body. Now with gamma radiation, if there's a nuclear bomb that goes off or a nuclear explosion, it requires several feet thick worth of concrete and steel or being underground to protect you from those rays, because those rays can travel right through the human body. They can travel right through wood. They can travel through thin pieces of metal. You need to have really thick protective structures to protect you from this kind of energy. So they were saying that these things somehow channel the strongest form of energy known in the universe. And then the first question is, how can a pendulum, which is just made of wood or metal, transmit something that would just pass right through it?
Here I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
When you say that, it can transmit that kind of energy, which probably would be transmitted only when we start to split the atoms and have those nuclear reactors, etc., etc. I agree with you. It's very convincing. But then what about the other visible spectrum energies?
Let me get to that in a minute. I just want to finish. I still have a little more to say about this part to complete the argument, and then I'll go to that.
Please.
Okay, so when I'm reading this, I'm thinking, okay, well, they're saying that this is transmitting essentially nuclear energy. How is that possible? Because nuclear energy would just go right through it. If a particle comes off of an atom and traveling at extremely high velocity, strong, it's going to go right through this thing. There's no way this could influence it. All right, that's number one. Number two, I was like, it took the greatest minds in the 20th century a massive effort around the world to figure out how to generate and create nuclear energy. So you're trying to tell me that they could have just made a pendulum, a giant pendulum, and then generated X-rays, gamma rays? I mean, really, is that simple? I don't think that's possible. Okay, the next thing is I looked at the evidence they used, and they had several different lines of evidence. One was that they showed X-ray emulsion films, and I won't go too far into this, I promise. I'll just show this one argument, then I'll move on. So they have X-ray emulsion films, and when you put one of these films in front of a source of radioactivity, like a piece of plutonium or something like that, it will shoot particles at it, and you'll see spots on the film. And they said, oh, this is evident. They put one of these pendulums in front of the film, and they saw spots. They're like, this is evidence that this is nuclear energy. The problem is that the spots were the wrong color. So they just photographed dust, basically. And, so they had a really creative idea. They had a bold theory, but the problem was they looked for, and there are other massive contradictions in the original papers when you read it carefully. And I have a video on YouTube for free where I talk about the contradictions. Anyway, so what I'm saying is they were very creative, very imaginative, but they had confirmation bias. They wanted to prove that their idea was true, so they ignored all the evidence to the contrary, and they may have even just made some things up or forced some conclusions that weren't correct. All right. Now, does that mean that, now I'm going to go back to your question. Now, does this mean that this thing is useless because the claim of negative green appears to be completely false?
No. That wasn't the
I
question.
want to talk about the other energies now. I want to talk about the other energies.
Yeah, because since you gave one argument, and this is a natural question. Please hear me out.
Sure,
The
sure.
you said that it is not plausible that this small little thing at our end would be having a capacity to give out that kind of energy, which goes into making the nuclear or atomic energy. And it sounds very convincing. However, my argument is that, when we are sending red, for example, which you agree with, that we can send red energy or green energy. So when we are sending red energy, we are just invoking the archetype of that energy and transmitting the archetype. So similarly, why don't we believe that when we are trying to send negative green, we are just trying to send the archetype of negative green in some kind of correspondent way?
Let me get to it. Let me finish my argument because I will answer your question. I was on the path to answering your questions.
I'm so sorry.
All right. So you're saying, you say, okay, so let's say negative green is a false concept. Like, do we just throw this pendulum out in the trash? And the answer is no, because even though I don't think that it can literally transmit nuclear energy, I do think that this thing can literally transmit other forms of energy that are commonly present in our environment, and that this object acts like a prism, that it somehow can interact with light from the environment. Like, we have light coming off of our body in the form of biophotons. They're coming out of our hands. There's sunlight, there's light from the lamps. There's always some light in the environment. And I think that this object can interfere with that light, and that by setting it in certain settings, you can transmit certain types of electromagnetic energy, mostly visible light, possibly also infrared, since infrared is absorbed by objects then emanated. But beyond that, that gets to the next question. Well, what about those invisible forms of energy like the negative green, or radio waves or ultraviolet, things like that? And that is where we have to put the science aside, and we have to look at another discipline which is very closely related to science, and some could argue it's the mother of science, and that's magic. And in magic, there is a principle called the principle of correspondence, where one thing in nature represents the archetypal force of another thing, and that archetypal force is reflected throughout different layers of nature. And magicians in the past, like alchemists, religious magicians, healers, like, for example, people who use phases of the moon, or things like that, what you're doing is you are tapping into an archetypal force, and you are using that force to transmit a frequency. Now, with this pendulum, what I think happens is that in these invisible energies where it can't transmit it literally, like the negative green, what I think it's doing instead is it's transmitting substitutes that are possible within the realm of what's going on here. So, for example, negative green would be at the very end of the energy spectrum. So the energy spectrum is getting higher and higher, and then it ends at supposedly at negative green, and then it would start over again from zero with, like, radio waves or things like that. So it represents endings or interruption signal. So while I don't think this pendulum can literally transmit negative green, what I think it can do is it can simulate that by transmitting a signal of interruption, which is the magical or archetypal equivalent of an ending that negative green, if it exists, also represents. So negative green would be at one level of nature, the end of a cycle at another. So like the end of the day, 12 midnight, the end of the year, the winter solstice, the end of a life. They all represent this ending energy that you can tap into. It's a force of ending. And I do think the pendulum could do that. Now, how could it do that? Well, white represents the entire electromagnetic spectrum. black represents nothing, no light emanated at all. So that's the end, black, white. They're polar opposites. It's like when you turn a light on and off in a room, it creates an interruption. It's an ending. An interruption would be the end of the day at 12 midnight. An interruption would be the dark phase of the moon where there's no light being reflected off the moon. The end of a lifetime, but it's on a karmic cycle of reincarnation over and over again, but the life ends. So there's this ending force. And I think that this pendulum replicates it, and that Karnak pendulum replicates it somehow by interfering with light, and that it flickers. It's like there's light and then dark, light, dark, light, dark. And this sends a signal of interruption. And that little interruption gives you a window of opportunity to cause change, because whatever was happening before gets interrupted. And then something new can come in, like healing or a spoken command, or the thing that's going on, it might hit that interruption signal and just stop. Or it might hit that interruption signal and get even stronger. So that's kind of how I see it. And so I take the science to a certain point, but then you have to abandon the science and look elsewhere to other things. And the only thing I could find that makes sense would be this magic concept of correspondence.
And that is why you prefer to call it the gray energy rather than the negative green, because it is a combination of black and white, or happening between the spectrum, which is representing white and black, which brings me on to the next particular topic. So, as we mentioned that, people find this very easy to use when they learn more about healing with colors. So, for example, if there is a patient and the patient is young and he or she is not able to sleep at night, and then you transmit the blue color so that it makes him or her sleep. So similarly, I wanted to ask you, what in your experience this gray energy can be used for?
Yeah, like I was just saying, it's used for everything. It's great for every single thing, because what it does is it provides an interruption signal. An interruption does several things. Number one, interruption, if there's something happening, when it's interrupted, it makes a space or a gap, so something new can come in. So example, a person could start to heal. If they were sick, this is the vibration of sickness. The interruption can allow the vibration of healing to take over. When you create an interruption, if you say a pendulum command and you put your words and your intention into that space, that little gap that's created, it can now get a foothold and start to grow and influence things. Another thing is that when something is weak and you stress it, it will just die. It will end naturally. If something is sort of weak and it's meant to sustain itself and it's meant to continue, like let's say a person's health is very weak, you can stress it a little bit, and sometimes that will make them get stronger. So it's a very, very useful energy. It's very subtle. It's not going to blast you with radioactivity, but I believe it is related to that same archetypal force of the endings that, if negative green exists in nature, would be that same kind of force. It's just a different expression of it, but it's extremely useful. So I know people who use like the Karnak pendulum or other flickering white light or gray pendulums. They use it for everything because it provides so many opportunities for change, because that's what you're doing with pendulum alchemy. You're trying to change and transform things. Right. So it's very useful to have this kind of energy. And one note I just want to make before I go any further, then I'll stop and let you ask your question. With this gray energy, or now I like to call it flickering white light, it is not a euphemism. I'm not just saying that because like I don't want to use the term negative green. It's like, oh, this is really negative green, radioactive, but I'm just changing the name of it so it sounds more pleasant. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that this flickering white light or gray energy, this is, if negative green exists, it would be related to it on an archetypal level, but they are not the same thing. Just like the dark moon is not the same. Like when the moon has 0% illumination, that is archetypically the same as the winter solstice, but it is not the same expression of that. Like when a person dies, that is the same thing as the dark moon when there's no light. It's the death of the moon's illumination, but it's a different expression of that same ending. So it's an apples to oranges comparison. Yes, they're related in that they're both fruit, but one's an apple and one's an orange. It doesn't mean you're going to taste orange when you bite the apple. So
Right.
they're both fruits. It's the same archetype in nature, but they're different expressions of that same archetype. So that's what I'm arguing with this pendulum. It's not making radioactivity. So all the warnings that people give you don't make sense. And think of it, if it did make radioactivity, if you put it inside of a box, would that really stop the radioactivity from coming out? You know, if you took the pendulum apart, would that really stop it? No, it would just go right through the box and would kill everyone. You know, so it doesn't make any sense at all. So anyway, sorry. Thank you for letting me explain that.
No, no, that was a beautiful explanation. And once I uh, came to know more about it from you, it took the fear away of the negative green. And I'm sure that the people who would be watching this video, if they had any fear about negative green, it would have been wiped out. And moreover, how to use it positively is something you have emphasized in your book. And there are two particular things which you used to emphasize. Probably you didn't find time to explain them now. Let me bring that up right now for our viewers. And you used to say that there are two things where negative green or gray energy can be used very beautifully. And for example, you said that if somebody is dying, and it is not very easy for him to die somehow, then you give the negative green. If there is any possibility of the person to come back to life, he will, or otherwise it will be easy for him to pass over. Similarly, if there is a relationship, you mentioned somewhere in your book, I read some years ago, that if there is a relationship and in the relationship it is not working out very positively, so the persons are very confused whether they are meant to be for each other or not, then probably use this energy. If inherently the relationship has a bond, it will come out stronger. Otherwise, it will die down of its own. So this is how the gray energy can be used in such kind of grave situations where there is so much of dilemma which is prevailing, and there is no exact light which can be seen. Then this energy provides you with a solution that either you are 100% now positive or you are 100% now negative. At least you are at one side. One of the
Yeah.
other dimensions in which I have been using is something which is very novel. If you allow me, then I can discuss with you that particular aspect of using the gray energy.
Yeah. Can I comment on what you just said first?
Please. I just
Yeah.
echoed your views. Yeah, please.
Okay. So yeah, so like, when a person is transitioning, assuming that they're getting medical care and everything else that's standard care to help them, either keep them alive or help them to pass, depending on what the person's choices are. Like in the United States, the person decides whether or not they want to have medical intervention to try to save them, to the highest level, or if they want to just allow themselves to go. Anyway, so what you can do with this gray energy is very subtle. It's not going to kill them, but what it does is it just provides a little stress, like I said, and it stimulates that. And if that person is already at that frequency, more or less, that they're going to transition, because this is the energy of endings, they're going to start to resonate with that, and it's going to allow them to have a peaceful transition that's not, where they're not suffering for a long time. Alternatively, it could actually cause them to have a rebound in health. So we've seen both things where we've done this and then the person got actually better. But like I said, if, they're already in a greatly weakened state, so you're dealing with something very subtle here. It's not going to like kill somebody, but it's very gentle. Like, do you want to go this way? It's just very gently giving you an invitation. Do you want to go that way or not? And, unless the person's in a very, very highly weakened state, they're not going to respond to it. Okay.
Absolutely,
So,
you're right.
yeah. Yeah. So
There are circumstances in life when there are so many people who are at the stage where they are not able to live, neither are they able to die. And this is where these kind of healings, whether you do it through this universal pendulum, and there are other healings, there are native healings of either the Hindus or the Red Indians in America, which are absolutely meant for this particular situation. So it is not that you are killing someone, but it is just that you are facilitating them to be at either side of the road.
Right. It's a subtle point, but yeah, I'm just saying you don't need to be scared of this because it's not going to like make you die or something. But once a person has reached that state where they are that weak and they are so on the edge of passing, a subtle shift can help them. Now, with the relationships, like I have a funny story about that. So this woman I know was like, "Oh, I don't know if this man likes me or not. We've gone on several dates, you know." And I said, "Well, do you want to find out?" For real, whether he likes you or not? And she's like, yes, I want to absolutely do it no matter what. And I was like, okay, so let's just send some of this gray energy or flickering white light, so-called negative green. Let's just send it to the relationship and see what happens. And literally, she said, yes, I want to do it 100%. Next day, the guy broke up with her. You know, so there was uncertainty and now there's certainty. And what I found it very useful for energy healing is when there's a cord. So in energy healing, there's this idea of cords where someone can attach an energy cord to you and they can suck your energy and hurt you and all these things. And cords are healthy, but there are also unhealthy ones. So what I've found you can do with the Universal Pendulum or with a Karnak pendulum is you can set it to the gray energy setting. You can then send the gray energy to the cord. But first, I always send love to the cord to try to raise the consciousness of the cord, because anyone who's corded to you is needing energy, and especially if they're harmful energy, like if they're trying to take energy from you, they need help. That's why they're doing it. They're desperate. So I send love to the cord first to help the person heal, and then I send the gray energy or the flickering white light, negative green, to the cord. That way, the cord will wither and die on its own if it's an unhealthy cord. But if there's some karma that you need to resolve with that person before the cord ends, the cord will actually strengthen a little bit to allow it to heal, because you need to finish whatever it is with that person in this lifetime. And sending love is a great precursor, because a lot of times it's like we wronged somebody in a previous life or something, or someone wronged us, and we have to come to a place of forgiveness with them. It doesn't mean acceptance, but forgiveness. Sending love to that cord helps with that, and it can help to resolve you from the karmic link that is harmful. So those are just a couple of examples there. But I use it like for, if someone's sick, you can send gray energy to the illness, to try to get it to stop. Or sometimes I like to send gray energy to something I want to have happen. Like send gray energy to, the root chakra or something like that, because I want to stress it a little bit to make it stronger. So there are a lot of creative uses for this, and it's so subtle. It just shifts things in a very subtle way. So it's not like you're blasting it with a nuclear energy beam or something. It's all very, very subtle. So it's very helpful.
Right. When we do, since you brought the subject of psychic cords, when we do this paranormal healing, this can also be used in many novel ways, because this negative green, or better termed as gray energy, sometimes if you have some kind of problematic energy coming from a different portal, for example, or a different dimension, then our way to deal with it is only through the portal which we know and which is negative green. So somehow we use certain techniques whereby the negative green energy facilitates the transmission of either that particular disturbing energy back to the dimension in which it belongs, or it sends some kind of messages beyond this particular dimension to the other dimension, but that will be pretty advanced to dwell more on it on this particular in this particular talk. But naturally, in case it is possible, then we can have a different segment on paranormal healing and discuss how this particular pendulum can be used to cause paranormal healing. For the time being, let us move on to the next topic. And this is the radiesthetic chart. So this radiesthetic chart, if some patient comes to you, what you do is you douse on the radiesthetic chart and you find out what is the current status of the disease. And this is something which you mentioned. I'm talking about your concept. And this is something that you mentioned. And I found it very healthy when dealing with my clients. So exactly what we can do by using the radiesthetic chart when a person comes, I would like to hear from you.
Yeah, sure. So just in case people don't know, in my view, it's just colors, basically, the colors of the rainbow. And then I substitute in equivalents for energies that are invisible. So I just substitute in, so like, radio waves would be black, the gray energy is here. This is the ending energy. And then there are a few other energies as well. So what you can do with this is that I realize that the electromagnetic spectrum correlates to the movement of the sun through the day, in the morning, the afternoon, the evening, and then night. And that correlates to human life. So reincarnation, birth, life, dying, and then the afterlife. And so, and there's more to it, but basically once you understand what colors relate to on an archetypal level, when someone comes to you, you can check where they're at energetically and get a lot of information.
Yes.
So you can check, like, you can do a healing. Let's say someone comes, you can say, well, what's their energy right now? Where are they at? You can see literally like their body energy, where it's at. Are they, or you can say, what is the energy of this chakra right now? Or you can do a healing on somebody and you can say, was the healing successful? And because I've also correlated this with percentages. So you can very easily find out, do I need to do more? Or do I need to add something in, take something away? So you can get a lot of information from these energies. And then also, like I said, these energies, once you know the system of how they relate to different things on an archetypal level, you can use like the universal pendulum or a pendulum that has a specific frequency, or you can use your spoken word. But with this universal pendulum, it just does it automatically. You can choose a particular energy to send. So like, let's say, you want to get somebody to the ideal state of energy health, which is blue-green in this system. Well, and let's say they're at yellow. What you can do is you can set the universal pendulum, you can set it to blue-green and then send that energy and try to raise them up to it. Or we also discovered that you could set it to yellow and send that exact same frequency that the person is at to them. And sometimes that will make them go to the ideal frequency. So there's an entire system. So this chart, these radiesthetic charts, once you understand that it's not literally nuclear energy or literally radio waves, you then can discover, and I've done this for you in courses, like I have a color healing course. You discover a whole world of these correspondences where you can read energy and then find out, well, what does this energy mean? It represents that this is the person's root chakra. It's if it's red, let's say it's their root chakra. It means there's reincarnation of some kind happening. It means, the rising sun. There are all these different correspondences that you can get from this. It means energy of cell growth and blood flow, things like that, the circulatory system. So once you have this system, you get so much information that you can then use for a healing to help somebody. It makes it so much easier to do and so much more logical. So
for the beginners, if they have this radiesthetic chart, what like I started doing with my patients was that, whenever somebody comes and he complains of something, and if you have the radiesthetic chart or the color chart or the color wheel, you just with your pendulum see exactly where does the problem lie. For example, somebody suffering from diabetes. So what you do is that you take your pendulum, keep it on the color chart and see where the pendulum goes. So if it goes to, for example, the last quadrant, or just understand this to be the gray, the black, or the infrared energy, that means it is very intense. So the the diabetes problem is too intense. It will be difficult for us to bring it back to a normal level. But suppose it goes to the red or the green level, it means it is light. We'll be easily able to solve it. So it gives us an initial idea about what kind of problem are we dealing with. Also, I have tried to use it in my communication. If somebody is calling me and just asking that there is a patient and he's suffering and they want to just know whether this person will live more or something like that astrologically. And if you don't apply astrology, but if you just apply dowsing, you just get to have an idea of what is the status of his health currently. And a lot of what I'm talking about is mentioned in Erich's book on advanced healing. So,
Yeah, no,
so
totally.
that is very beneficial for people who are just starting out their journey in pendulum healing.
Right. So, yeah, the most simple level, I have a course called Effective Dowsing where it explains how to read the chart and a simple level and shows percentages for each thing. But then in the color healing course, it shows you a master key of correspondences about what does this color mean at many different levels of reality. And the cool thing is that the Universal Pendulum has all this. And what I discovered is this is all related to the sun, passage of the sun through the day, the passage through the sun through the year, which also corresponds to a human life. So that's another reason why this is called the Universal Pendulum, because it has a universal key of knowledge that explains the entire system of magic correspondences based on an understanding of the passage of the sun, the apparent passage of the sun, because obviously it's an illusion at some level, but it is reality too, because in the temperate climates we get seasons. The sun, at midnight, historically people have said those are the witching hours when spirits are active, and that correlates to the afterlife. It also correlates to death. So even though it seems to be an illusion, this movement of the sun, it's actually reflected in our reality as concrete things. So this universal pendulum is the master key that shows you in a very simplified form this entire system, this system that explains almost everything. I wrote a whole book called The Esoteric Sun about this. And that's why I call it universal. And you are tapping into these universal archetypal forces of reincarnation, life, deincarnation or dying, and then the afterlife using this pendulum. But it's reflected in the form of energy. And that's why these charts, these radiesthetic charts, are so useful, because intuitively we understand this at a very simple level. We can understand, the rising sun is the sun coming alive. The day is coming to life. In the afternoon, the day is happening. In the evening, the day is ending. At night, the day is over. We understand this at some deep primal level, being, diurnal animals, and then we're very visually oriented. So most of us can see color. We have a very deep visceral understanding of color. So when you're doing pendulum dowsing, it's very easy for your subconscious mind to recognize these colors and to use them as a system, almost like a code or a way to transmit information. So you can do a reading, and then your unconscious can very easily choose the color that represents what is going on, because it can feel the subconscious, you can sense the energy. And then knowing the translation, you can get a lot of information on many different levels of reality about what is going on with that person who's coming to you. And as Dr. Prabal said, at the most simple level, you can just get a general reading of where are they at? Are they strong, weak? Is it intense, not intense? But you can go into so many different layers with this. It's mind-boggling. And I made a course called Using the Esoteric Sun for this. It explains in great detail. It's in the books in a more rudimentary form.
Excellent. So if somebody understands the correspondences in nature, that means how the day corresponds to the season corresponds to the year corresponds to the human body, the sun corresponds to the grandfather, or something like this. Means if you can find the similarity between things, then you can have the power to shift the reality, and the tool which gives you enough flexibility to do that is the universal pendulum, because with the help of the universal pendulum, you'll be able to fix an exact correspondence or an exact frequency or an exact color, and then you'll be able to transmit into the nature in order to cause a shift in the real world. So this was all about universal pendulum, which we talked about today. And I'm very grateful to Dr. Erich Hunter to have come and shared his views, shared his thoughts, and shared his research with us. And I feel that this fear of negative green, after listening to him, will shed away. And I hope, Dr. Erich, that we have a chance again to have you on our show to talk about certain advanced aspects of pendulum healing. Thank you very much for being with me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I could go on and on because like I created my own designs and I understand some things about how these things work that aren't explained. So yeah, I've got a lot to talk about.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being with me.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.